Can you see me now? Yes.
I can't see anything on this side. What?
Sorry, I need to hold on to it.
Are you starting over?
Is she up? Can she talk on the phone?
Hello? It says no.
Yeah, it says. Oh, go for it? All right, here I go. Bye-bye. Hello, and welcome to Star Stories at Chabot Space and Science Center. My name's Doug Olson, and I'll be your host for this evening. We're excited to be with you on this evening virtually through Facebook Live. During our closure, we're developing additional ways to engage and looking forward to sharing new activities, new videos, and so much more with you. Please tune in every Friday evening at 8 p.m. for a variety of engaging programming that you can enjoy and participate in from home. You can visit our website at chabotspace.org and click on the events button to see a complete listing of our upcoming virtual programming. So, what we're going to talk about tonight is star stories, stories that our ancestors told each other about the patterns they could see in the stars. Now, human brains, human minds are very good at noticing patterns, even if there's no real basis for that pattern at all. It could be completely random, but we humans tend to find patterns and find images that will excite us. And of course, people have been telling stories about ancestors and heroes and interesting phenomena for generations. And it was only natural that when they saw a pattern in the sky, in the stars, they could tell those same stories and add them and associate them with the patterns in the sky. And it should be noted that every culture has their own stories. There is no right version of these stories. They would swap the stories back and forth and tell each other those stories and then trade stories with their neighbors. And so there's no right version of any of these stories. They're all right. There's no wrong version at all. But the tales change in the telling, and so we have to make an allowance for that. Now, a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere can recognize a constellation called the Big Dipper. And that is a group of 7 stars, which is actually part of the constellation of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And the strange thing about that constellation, the Big Dipper and its associated stars, the strange thing is that cultures all over the Northern Hemisphere regard this as a bear. Cultures that, as far as we know, have really had no contact with each other except way back in prehistory. So the Siberian nomads who have shamans for their spiritual and mystical leaders, they see a bear. A lot of the Indians in North America see a bear. A lot of people in Europe see a bear. Not everybody. There are places in England where they regard it as a wain, a wagon, or even a cleaver. But throughout Europe, it's mostly a bear. In the United States, we call it the Big Dipper. No one's entirely sure why. And it looks like a dipper, and there's no doubt about that. But why did the Native Americans regard it as a dipper? Or was it the Native Americans at all? There's a song called "Follow the Drinking Gourd," which is supposed to be a guide for the slaves in the Deep South before the Civil War, that they could use the Big Dipper as a guidepost to finding their way north. That possibly is just apocryphal. The song certainly exists, and it was first collected, I think, in the 30s. So it probably doesn't go back to the days of slavery, but it's a nice concept. And many of those stories, again, the stories aren't the same, but the concept of it being a bear is very widespread. The Iroquois Native Americans, who told about the Big Dipper, they saw the 4 stars of the bowl as the bear itself, and the 3 stars in the handle as 3 hunters. The first one closest to the bear was Chickadee. He had a spear or a bow and arrows, or maybe both. And right behind him in the middle of the handle was Robin, and he was said to be carrying a pot on his shoulder. And then finally the end of the handle was Moosebird. Now the job was that Chickadee would hunt and kill the bear with his weapons. Robin would go fill up his pot with water, and that would allow them to cook the bear meat. And Moosebird's job was to gather up firewood and make a good fire, so they could boil the water and have good bear meat feast. Well, they found the bear, and Chickadee did slay the bear, hunt the bear. Robin was so excited that he jumped into the pool of blood that was coming out of the bear and just got himself all over blood. But his friend Chickadee said, "You're a mess. You need to clean up a little bit." Well, Robin shook himself really hard, and most of the blood came off. It was the autumn time as well, and so that's why the leaves turn red in the autumn, because it's the bear's blood that Robin has shaken off of himself. And of course, there's some places he couldn't quite clean himself off. That's why robins have a red breast. That's still the bear's blood. So now they've killed the bear, and after he got over his excitement, Robin went and filled up his pot with water, and Chickadee helped cut up the bear meat, and they popped it into the water and waited for Moosebird. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they kept waiting, and finally they gave up, and they said, "This guy's never going to show up. I guess we'll just have to make the fire ourselves." So off they went, gathered up firewood, make a big roaring fire, placed the pot in the fire, got the water good and bubbling, cooked the meat. Oh, it smelled so good. And just as they were ready to eat, up comes Moosebird and says, "Hi guys, am I late? Have I missed anything?" Which is why the Iroquois consider that anybody who shows up at the last minute and gets out of doing any work but just wants to cash in on the benefits, we call him Moosebird, and you can call him that too. Another story about the Big Dipper from India this time has to do with the fact that the 7 stars of the Big Dipper are regarded as the 7 sages, who were important figures in Hindu legend as being very wise men who were to be emulated, to be admired, and if you can do this, you're a good man. And the 7 sages are married to 7 brides who are represented by the Pleiades, the group of 7 stars in the winter sky. And I'm told that at traditional Hindu weddings, even today, the bride is exhorted to remember the Pleiades and be true and honorable and honest with her husband and be true to him. And the groom is reminded of the 7 sages, and he's told to emulate them. He tries to be as honorable and dedicated and loving as any of the sages might have been. And I think that's a marvelous holdover from some time in the past. Now, one of the stories about the bear, the great bear, that's probably best known, comes from Greek mythology. And the story is that Zeus, the king of the gods, could never keep his eyes and hands off mortal women. He was just never satisfied. And one of the women he pursued was named Callisto. She had a son called Arcas. Well, Zeus was really, really panting for her. And Hera, his wife, was a little jealous. No, she was a lot jealous. She hated it when her husband did this stuff. So she turned Callisto into a bear and set Callisto wandering the woods in bear form. Well, the years went by, and Callisto's son Arcas, still a human, was out hunting one day, and he saw this beautiful, beautiful bear, and he thought, what a great trophy that would make on my wall. So he got close enough and got all set to kill the bear, not knowing it was his own mother. And Zeus did know it was his own mother and said, I can't allow this. So he turned Arcas into a bear too. And now there were two bears, and neither one of them was going to kill the other. But Hera was still pretty anxious, pretty angry about the way Zeus had behaved. So Zeus was concerned that she might do harm to Callisto and Arcas, the great and small bear. So he took hold of them by their tails and threw them up into the sky. And now we have the Little Dipper, the small bear, Ursa Minor, and the great bear, Ursa Major. And both of them, as they're depicted in the stars, have long tails. Well, bears don't really have long tails. They're little stubby things. So the story is that when Zeus took hold of their tails, he whirled and whirled and whirled them round and round and round to get some good momentum, and then he threw them into the sky. And in the process of whirling them around, their tails got all elongated. And that's why bears have long tails. Just to remind you, for the late visitors, my name's Doug Olson. I'm telling star stories about the stars. If you have questions, please hold them. I'll be able to answer questions at the end of this presentation, probably around 8:30 or so, and then I'll be glad to answer any questions I can. Now, another constellation that's high in the sky in the summer is Hercules. Hercules is kind of a rectangular constellation with some faint stars trailing off of it. And Hercules, as you may know, was a hero of the ancient Greeks. Zeus was his father. And again, Hera was not too pleased about that because she wasn't his mother. And the people who were raising Hercules thought maybe if we rename him Heracles in honor of Hera, then maybe she'll leave him alone. Well, they renamed him Heracles, but Hera did not leave him alone. She sent a couple of snakes to kill him in his cradle. He was just a baby, but she sent a couple of snakes. And when she did, they crawled into the crib with Heracles, but he was already so strong as a baby that he was able to strangle them with his bare hands, baby bare hands. He strangled two snakes. So when the attendants came into the room the next morning and not quite sure what they'd find, they found two dead snakes and baby Heracles just laughing and gurgling away. So obviously calling him Heracles hadn't helped. So they reverted it to Hercules, and he eventually grew to manhood and was very famous for being so very, very strong and such a great doer of deeds. But Hera never really forgave him, or forgave Zeus actually, but she was still after him. So she sent a fit of madness onto him, and he went crazy. He was completely out of his mind. And as I say, he was an adult by then, so he was married and had a son. And in his madness, he actually murdered his wife and child. And when he regained his wits, he was deeply, deeply unhappy. And he went to the oracle and said, "What can I do to possibly atone for this?" And the oracle said, "Bind yourself to the local king and tell him you'll do any 10 labors that he sets you." So Hercules went to the king and explained what he needed to do and do some works of atonement. And the king said, "Well, I will set you 10 tasks. The first is that in the forest near our town, there is a lion roaming wild and untamed, the Numian lion we call it. I need you to slay that Numian lion and bring me the skin." Now, one thing you ought to know is that his hide is impenetrable. You shoot arrows at him, they'll just bounce off. So you'll have to figure out a different way to kill him. Well, Hercules went out and tried to shoot him with arrows, but of course it didn't work. So the next thing he knew, he got his big old club and he smashed the lion's skull and killed it that way. And then he took off the skin and brought it back to the king, said, "Job number 1 is done. Here's your skin." Well, the king said, "I don't really have a use for it. Why don't you keep it, and it'll be your badge and symbol of your great strength and heroism." Well, Hercules said, "Okay," and for the rest of his life, he did wear that lion skin. And Zeus, having been imported by someone to honor this fierce creature, he put the lion into the sky. It's the constellation Leo, which is up there in the spring, and it's part of the zodiac where the planets move. So you can find Leo and know that there's very possibly a planet there. Another labor that Hercules had to do was to get rid of the Hydra. Now, the Hydra was a monster that lived in a swamp, and it had 9 heads, and they were on snake-like necks, and anybody who got too close would get eaten. So they wanted to get rid of the Hydra too, and make sure that nobody else got eaten. Well, Hercules went to the swamp and took out his sword, and the Hydra reared up, and he sliced off one of the heads, and 2 more heads grew exactly where that one had been cut off. So it's not going to work to cut those heads off. They're just going to increase more and more and more. Well, Hercules had a companion. Some people said it was another son of his, but he asked his companion to get a big, hot, blazing torch and stand right beside him. And when the Hydra reared up its head again, Hercules lopped off one of the heads and told his friend immediately to cauterize the wound so no more heads could grow. And in that way, Hercules did lop off all the heads of the Hydra and killed it, and went back to the king and said, "Job 2 is done. What's next?" Well, he had a lot of other labors to do. I should say that Hydra is in the sky as well. There's a very faint constellation in the southern skies called Hydra, and he's kind of large and sprawling and looks like he might have 9 heads on 9 necks. So if you've got a good imagination, you can see that as Hydra. Another labor that Hercules had to do was to slay the Cretan Bull. Now, on the island of Crete, there was this very fierce bull, and that bull had actually been the father of the Minotaur, of which you may have heard. The Minotaur was a great monstrous thing with a human body, but the head of a bull, and he liked to eat people. So the king of Crete didn't like having that monster so close at hand. He asked Hercules to slay the Cretan bull. Hercules did that, and Zeus put that bull in the sky as well. It's the constellation Taurus, which is a winter constellation, again part of the zodiac. It's where the planets go. But that Taurus seems to be charging down on the constellation of Orion. He does look like a bull, and Orion is a hunter, so he's got his shield raised up to fend off the bull. He's got his club raised over his head to smack it down, and he just sits there, just like that, waiting for the bull to charge. And the story of Orion is that he was a hunter, and he liked to boast that he could hunt any animal on the face of the earth, and given the chance, he would gladly do so. Well, Gaia, the goddess of the earth, didn't like seeing that, hearing that. She said, "These are my creatures, these are my pets. I love them all. Why is he wanting to kill them all?" And so she went to Hera and said, "I want you to do something about this." And Hera said, "Well, what would you like me to do?" And Gaia said, "Well, I want to get rid of him." And Hera said, "Well, you have that pet scorpion you especially adore, right? Why don't you send that to sting Orion? That will kill him, and then he'll be gone." Well, Gaia did send her pet scorpion, and the scorpion did sting Orion, and Orion writhed and thrashed and stamped in his death agony, and in the process of stamping around dying, he stepped on the scorpion and killed it. Well, then he died, and so Gaia was relatively happy, but still didn't like losing her pet scorpion. So she asked Hera what could be done. And Hera went and talked to Zeus, and she wasn't mad at him at this particular time, and Zeus was able to see her point. So he told her, "Okay, we'll put Orion in the sky, and we'll put the scorpion in the sky, and both of them can be up there honored." And Gaia said, wait just a gosh darn minute. They are mortal enemies. If you put them both in the sky next to each other, they'll never stop fighting. So instead of allowing them to be next to each other, Zeus put the Scorpion into the summer sky and Orion into the winter sky, and they never cross paths. They never come together. Orion is a very prominent constellation in the winter sky, high up. Scorpio is much lower in the southern sky. But if you can get to a place with dark skies and a clear southern horizon when the moon isn't so bright, Scorpio is a beautiful, beautiful constellation. It's got this deep red star right where its heart ought to be, and it's got a little sting in its tail. The stars actually make a sting-shaped arc. So it's a beautiful place to look, and there's lots and lots of wonderful things to see through binoculars or a telescope, because that's the center of the galaxy pretty much in that direction. Now back to Orion for just a moment in the winter. Just to the feet of Orion is the great dog, Canis Major. And there's a great story from India about that dog, that great dog. The story is that there were 5 princely brothers and 1 dog. The leader of the brothers was Yudhishthira, and his dog was named Svana. And he and his 4 brothers decided one day that they wanted to go find the gate to heaven. It was in the mountains somewhere, they knew that, but they didn't quite know exactly where it would be found, so they all set off, 5 brothers and the dog Svana. Well, they came to a town after a day or so, and the town was having a big festival, a big party. And one of the 4 brothers who just loved festivals and parties, he said, oh, I've got to stay here. I've got to stay until this festival is over. You fellows go on. I'll catch up. Yeah, I will. Maybe. Anyway, they left him there, and they went further a little ways, and they came to another town a couple days later where the young princess was being given her honors because she just turned 18, and so she was now a full-fledged princess, not a child princess, but a real princess. And she was dancing as part of the ceremony to make her a princess. And she was dancing beautifully. She was just so graceful, so elegant, so lovely. And the brother who loved himself dancing, he turned to his brothers and said, I'm going to stay here. I have to dance with this beautiful, beautiful woman. She's so lovely. She's so elegant. I've got to stay and dance. I'll catch up. So he stayed. And the other 3 and Svana the dog kept going. Well, after a few more days, they came to a valley, and there were 2 villages on opposite sides of the valley. And the people of those villages both were very proud of their martial prowess, their martial arts. And they liked to have competitions to see who was the best martial arts practitioner in both villages. Well, one of the brothers was, you guessed it, a big practitioner of martial arts. And he decided, I'm going to stay and take part in these competitions. I can't possibly give up this opportunity. So the 2 remaining brothers and Svana the dog kept going. And after a few more days, they came to a town where there was a great temple with many, many hundreds of monks, all engaged in seeking enlightenment and meditating. And the brother for whom that was the absolute best thing you could possibly do with your life was meditate and become enlightened. He told that last remaining brother, Yudhishthira and Svana, I'm going to stay here and learn to meditate, become enlightened. You guys go on. Well, they did. They eventually, after much wandering and searching, they found the doorway to heaven. And the god Shiva was guarding it. And he greeted them as they approached and said, Yudhishthira, you've made it. You found it. Congratulations. What a journey, what an epic search you put on. But you found it, and now you're welcome to come into heaven. And Yudhishthira said, okay, Svana, let's go. And Shiva said, just a minute. Dogs don't go to heaven. We can't let a dog into heaven. And Yudhishthira said, wait, that's wrong. I had 4 brothers, and they all abandoned me. And the only one who stayed loyal to me was Svana the dog. If he can't come into heaven, I won't come into heaven. And Shiva communed with his fellow deities, telepathically, I guess, and they all came to an agreement. And he turned back to Yudhishthira and said, all right, my brother gods and I have agreed you and Svana can both come in. And so they did. And to honor his loyalty, the gods put Svana the dog into the heavens as the constellation Canis Major, the great dog. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Scorpio is right near the center of our galaxy. If you're looking at it, you're looking toward the center of our galaxy. And if you, on a very dark night with good visibility, good clear skies, you can see a band of well, it looks kind of like a milky band across the sky. We call it the Milky Way. And the Greeks, who called it, there in Greek, the Milky Way, the word for milk in Greece is galactos. And so they called the Milky Way, the roadway in the sky, the galaxy. And we still call it a galaxy. It's a huge, huge flat disk of hundreds and hundreds of billions of stars, where our star is just one of them. And it's actually a flat structure. It's not globular. It's not round like a sphere. It's flat, kind of like a pizza with a bulge in the middle. And so when we look along that flat plane, we see all the stars that we can't quite distinguish with our naked eye, but they all blend together into that Milky Way. And the Navajo had a story about that. They said that when they first arrived in this world, the sky, when the moon was not up in the nighttime, but the night sky apart from the moon was completely black, and they couldn't see. It was just terribly disconcerting because they would try and walk and they'd trip over things and they couldn't figure out where they're going, and it was a bad situation. So they called on Black God, one of their deities, and complained that they couldn't see anything at night. Well, Black God got out his pouch of jewels, and he took out about 24 of the brightest jewels, and he carefully placed each one of them in the sky, and they made beautiful patterns. The artwork of where he put them and how they arranged themselves and how they were symmetry and just beautiful patterns. They were all lovely, and all the Navajo said, "Oh, thank you so much. That's so much better." But then Coyote came, and he liked to make mischief, as you may know. So he grabbed the pouch of jewels from Black God, and he poured a bunch of the jewels out into his hand, and he flung them up into the sky quite randomly. And now you couldn't even see Black God's patterns that he'd made with those first couple dozen jewels or stars. They were all just lost in the mix of all those stars, which you'd had to make new patterns, and they weren't nearly as beautiful and lovely as the ones that Black God made, but that's what they were stuck with. And then, just to cap it off, Coyote took the pouch that had the jewels in it that he turned into stars, and he shook it over his outstretched hand, and all the little dust came out from the bottom of the pouch. And he flung that up into the sky, and that became the Milky Way. So that's why there's a milky roadway in the sky, because Coyote sprinkled the dust from the jewel pouch. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the end of the stories. I could go on for quite a while, but I won't. I'll tell you one more, which is kind of different. Most constellations in their stories are very, very old, and we have no idea how far back they go. But there's one that does have a historical basis. The story is revised for dramatic effect, of course, but the story is this. King Ptolemy III of Egypt was going off to war. This is roughly 200 BC, something like that. His queen, Bernice, vowed that if he returned safely, she would cut off her beautiful hair and give it as an offering to Aphrodite. Well, the king did go off to war, and he did come back safely, and she did cut off her hair, and placed it on the altar of Aphrodite and went home to bed. And the next morning, when the priests of Aphrodite came in, they found that her hair was gone, but there was a new constellation in the sky, Coma Berenices, Bernice's hair. It's a faint constellation, but it's historically grounded, kind of odd. So I'm going to stop telling stories now and take any questions that you might have. I hope I can answer them. You can chat, you can raise your hand, I guess, and type in a question. Let me just repeat that my name is Doug Olson, and I'm telling star stories for Chabot Space and Science Center. We're glad you could join us. Please join every Friday night. The plan is to have content here on this page every Friday night at 8 p.m., at least until we can reopen the center. So I hope you're all keeping healthy. Has anybody got any questions? Well, one more. Can I please tell a story about the seven sisters? Well, I did that earlier. Let's see. Another story about the seven sisters.
Pleiades. Pleiades.
Yeah, the Pleiades. I should say that the Pleiades, as we call them, are known in Japan by the name Subaru. And if you see a Subaru car, you'll see that it has actually 6 stars on the logo, and that's because it really is named after the Pleiades. Somebody asked, what was the very first constellation? Well, probably Ursa Major, the Great Bear, the Big Dipper, goes back as far as any of them. As I said near the beginning, people from all over the Northern Hemisphere have a shared concept that constellation is a bear. And those people have probably not been in contact with each other for at least 13,000 years. So those stories go back that far, perhaps farther. Somebody else asks, were there many stories about our own sun? Well, the sun was considered to be a god, associated with the god Apollo in Greek and Roman mythology. And he was said to be driving, or riding really, in a chariot drawn by horses across the sky. And there was the story that one day a mortal actually, wanted to see if he could drive the chariot of the sun, but he couldn't. The sun got really close to the earth and caused great havoc until Apollo got the control back and took the sun back where it belonged. Will I share a recording of this? It would be great fun for those who couldn't quite make it on time. Well, I'll leave that up to the people at Chabot. I believe they plan to post it on that Chabot Space and Science Center page, but we'll have to see what they say. How many constellations are there? There are 88 official constellations, and about 50 of them, maybe 40 to 50, were recorded in classical times. But later, and those were regarded as pictures in the sky, characters in the sky. The way a constellation works now in the International Astronomical Union is that a constellation is considered a region of the sky with certain stars in it. But it's more a bounded region, not so much a picture. I'm sorry, I'm seeing some of these questions go by and I'm doing my best, but they disappear. What is the pyramid alignment with the constellations or the stars? Well, the only thing I've seen about that is that the 3 stars of Orion's belt, which make an almost straight line, but not a perfectly straight line, it's been pointed out that the 3 pyramids of Giza form the same kind of not quite straight line. That's about all what I know about that. Is it true that the North Star is the only star in the sky that does not move? Well, of course, the stars don't move at all. When they rise and set, it's because the Earth is spinning. and it spins on an axis like a top. And the North Pole, the axis that it spins around in the north, that axis points directly to the North Star. So as the Earth spins, stars rise and set, but the stars right next to the North Star, the stars right next to the North Celestial Pole, they just go round and round. And the North Star hardly moves at all. It moves in a tiny little circle because it's not quite on the North Celestial Pole. But all the stars that are near it just go round and round. They don't rise and set, which is why the Egyptians called them the eternal stars and thought that they were that was where their dead pharaohs went, was to the eternal stars, the circumpolar stars. How would I recommend learning more about this? Any books or experiential learning? Yeah, there's a book called The Stars, A New Way to See Them by a man named H.A. Rey, R-E-Y. He was the guy who wrote the Curious George books, and he published this one back in the 50s, and it was a brand new way to see the stars, and it's very worthwhile. It's still in print. You can buy it from Chabot. They have it in the gift shop. You could order it from Amazon. You could order it from your local bookstore, which would be slightly more virtuous. And it really is an excellent book. What's my favorite star story? Well, I have a lot of favorites. The story of the 5 princely brothers and their dog who go looking for heaven, I really like that one. I like that one a lot. There's also the story of Perseus and Andromeda and Cassiopeia and Cepheus the king and Cetus the sea monster. It's a long, involved story, but most of the characters are in the sky. I try and make an effort to tell that story, especially when those stars are visible, usually in the fall. So when I do star stories at Chabot, after Chabot reopens, first Fridays at 8, usually, well, it depends on the timing. You'd have to ask the front desk when the stories are going to be told. But I'll be up on the observation deck first Friday, usually, telling these stories, and I'll tell you the story of Perseus and Andromeda when I'm up there. Please come by. Somebody asked, can I tell us about Cygnus? Well, Cygnus is a swan. It's part of it's got a bright star in it called Deneb. There's 2 other constellations high in the summer sky that also have very bright stars in them. Lyra the Lyre has a star called Vega, and Acala the Eagle has a star called Altair, and Cygnus has the star Deneb. So Cygnus is regarded as the swan. In Hindu mythology, it's considered to be a manifestation of the Garuda bird, which is the bird that the gods ride on when they need to go places. One of the nice things about Cygnus is that not the brightest star, but the star that forms the head of the swan. If you look at it through a telescope, it's actually 2 stars, a double star, and one is this beautiful deep gold color, and the other is a beautiful blue color. So blue and gold, I figure it's the official star of UC Berkeley. Don't you think so? So that's about all I've got. Are there questions I haven't answered? Let's see. As I get to scroll down. Are there any known ancient Celtic star stories? Very few. They didn't tend to write them down. A lot of these stories never got written down at all as in a coherent form. A lot of the Greek and Roman stuff did get written down coherently, but even then, you still have to kind of piece the things together. People make references to these stories, but they don't often tell the stories. Now, I can't think of a Celtic story offhand. There's a great story about from Norway, or from Iceland, I guess, in which Thor, the god of thunder, was going to visit the ice giants, and he had with him a dwarf named Anduraville, and they went and challenged the ice giants and got away successfully, which is a big deal. But on the way back, Andurraville couldn't keep up. So Thor put the dwarf into his backpack and carried him. Okay, Thor can do that. But as it turned out, when they got to the end of the day's travel and he got Andurraville out of the backpack, he discovered that one of Andurraville's toes, had been left out in the cold and had actually frozen. So Thor snapped it off and hurled it into the sky. And nobody's quite sure which celestial event or location or planet or anything was supposed to be represented by Andurraville's toe. The best guess I've seen that I like is that it's represented by Venus. And one of the little bits of tie together references that I like is that Andurraville is the Norwegian or Icelandic name for that dwarf, but in Anglo-Saxon, the same character is called Eärendil. And if you have read your Lord of the Rings and remember it in detail, there's a lengthy poem called Eärendil Was a Mariner. I didn't memorize it, so I can't quote it for you, but it's that same poem. And Tolkien himself believed that Eärendil was in fact a reference to the morning star, the brightly shining morning star. So that's about what I can do now. Let's see. Somebody asked, "What's the story of Cassiopeia?" Well, I don't have any more questions to answer. Doesn't look like. So if you want to, somebody says, "If you look up at the moon tonight," I'm listening outside, "you can see the rabbit's head and the rabbit ears that they talk about in Japan and China." Yeah, I need to get a good handle on that particular image, because I know it's there. And the Chinese put a rover on the moon, and I think they called it Jade Rabbit or something. Anyway, the story of Cassiopeia and Perseus goes like this. Zeus, king of the gods, saw a lovely mortal woman and came down and got her pregnant. And she was named Danae, and she was the daughter of a king of an island. Well, she had a son, and she called him Perseus. And the king of the island, who's now the grandfather of Perseus, he heard from an oracle that his own grandson would kill him one day. Well, he didn't want that. So he took Danae and baby Perseus and got a really large wooden chest and put them in the chest and closed the lid and threw it in the ocean. See, he didn't kill them. Last time I saw them, they were just fine. Not my problem. Well, the chest, he expected they would all drown, but of course the chest washed up on an island nearby and was pulled ashore by a shepherd named Dictys. And Dictys happened to be the brother of the king of the island, so he was a moderate shepherd, but he didn't have to worry about too much. So he raised Perseus as his own son, and Perseus grew to manhood and was quite a fine fellow. And one day the king called all the leading men together, the king of that island, and Perseus was one of them. And he said, "All right, I decided I want to have a great, wonderful herd of beautiful horses. I want every one of you to give me a horse." Well, Perseus didn't have any horses to give, so he rashly promised the king, "Anything else. Ask me anything else, I'll get it for you." Foolish. You don't do things like that. So the king said, "I've never liked you. Go bring me the head of Medusa the Gorgon." Now, Medusa had been a mortal woman, and she was very proud of her beautiful, beautiful hair. And she would boast how much her hair was better than that of the sea god Poseidon. And Poseidon didn't like that. He turned Medusa's beautiful hair into snakes. He made her whole head, her whole face, so ugly that if you merely stared into her eyes, you'd turn to stone. And then he shut her up on an island where nobody could come except people who wanted to get turned into stone. So now Perseus has to bring back the head of Medusa the Gorgon. How is he going to do that? Well, he prayed to the gods, said, I need some help here. And the three gods appeared, actually. Zeus brought him a sword and a sack to put the head in. Hermes loaned him some winged sandals so he could fly and not have to sail to this island. And Athena gave him a shield that was so brightly polished it was like a mirror. And they told him, here's a way to go about this. So Perseus flew on his winged sandals to the island where Medusa lived, and he crept up to the cave where she was, and he put the shield out and let the reflection from what was inside the cave. And he looked at the shield to get the reflection. And what he saw was that Medusa was asleep. So he crept into the cave, still looking in the shield, not looking at her, and he got out the sword and he whacked off her head, still without looking at it. He put it in the bag and started to fly home. Well, as he was flying home, he looked down on the shore, and there was a beautiful, beautiful young lady chained to a rock right by the sea. And he thought, this is pretty strange. So he went down to see what was going on, and he asked her the story, and she said, well, my parents are the king and queen. My father is King Cepheus, and my mother is Queen Cassiopeia. And my mother was boasting about how beautiful I am. And the sea god, Poseidon, he thought she was comparing me to one of his beautiful daughters, and he didn't like that. So he sent a monster to ravage the seacoast, eat anything or anybody that was close enough, and just cause great havoc all around the island. And my parents, the king and queen, didn't know how to make it stop. They went to an oracle, and the oracle explained that I had to be sacrificed to the monster, and then it would go away. So here I am on the side of the seashore, chained to this rock, waiting to be eaten by this monster. And at that point, the monster arrived, and he was thrashing with his tail and making the sea foam up and causing great earthquakes, and the whole land was shaking. And Perseus said, close your eyes and keep them close. And he turned to the monster, and without looking at it himself, he pulled the head out and showed it to the monster, and the monster turned to stone. And if you've been up on the coast of California, Northern California and Oregon, you see those, they call them haystack rocks, just offshore out in the ocean, but not too far. That's what the monster looked like after it turned to stone. So Perseus cut the chains from Andromeda with his sword and went back to the palace with her and delivered her safe and sound. Well, the king and queen were very, very happy, obviously, and they thanked him very much for saving their daughter. And they put on banquets and feasts and parties, and they gave him all the presents they could think of. And after a couple weeks, they finally said, Perseus, we deeply appreciate what you've done for us, but all we've done is given what we can think of. What would you like? Is there anything we could do for you that you can think of? And Perseus said, well, Andromeda and I have been hanging out quite a bit, and we've really grown very fond of each other. So I would like to marry your daughter. And they said, well, how does she feel about it? And she came in and said, oh, Father, he's the man I want to marry. So they had a wedding, and they had more feasting and parties and banquets and much celebration. And finally, after a few more weeks of that, Perseus and Andromeda flew off to Mycenae, where he became the king, and she was the queen. And of course, he had to give back the sandals and the sword and the bag. But before he gave the bag back, when he first got back to his own home island, he went back to present the head to the king there. And he got back to his home island where his mother was, and she was, he went to the little hut where he'd grown up and asked Dictys, where's Mom? And Dictys said, well, my brother, the king, asked her to come live in the palace. So she did. Well, Perseus went off to the palace to see what was going on, and found his mother, and she said, "Oh, I just want to be out of here so bad. This guy won't leave me alone. He bothers me. He harasses me. I don't know what to do. He won't leave me alone." And Perseus said, "I know what to do." So he went to the throne room where the king was holding court, and he told the king, "I have something very important for you that you asked me to get, but I think all your courtiers need to leave the room." So all the courtiers left, and the king said, "Okay, what have you got? I bet you didn't get the head of the Medusa. What did you get?" And Perseus said, "No, I got the head of the Medusa, just as you asked. Here, have a good look." So, of course, the king turned to stone, and his brother, who had raised Sir Perseus and Danae, he became the new king. And then they went back to Mycenae to become the king and queen. Okay, that's the story of Perseus and Andromeda. And if anybody's got any more questions, please pose them now. I want to thank you again for joining us. My name is Doug Olson. This has been Star Stories. Please consider supporting Chabot and our vital role in STEM education. Please donate so we can continue to provide free virtual programming while we're closed. Any amount counts. To donate, you can visit the website at chabotspace.org and click on the donate button. Somebody asked, is it possible to coin a new constellation? Well, I made reference to the International Astronomical Union, IAU. It's an official international body that is responsible for naming everything in the sky. And at this point, they've got, as I said, 88 constellations that are really just defined areas of the sky. So the IAU is no longer in the business of defining constellations. You are, of course, free to make up your own, but nobody else is going to know what you're talking about. And the same is true if you see one of those ads that says, for $50, you can name an asteroid after your loved one. Well, you can send in $50 and they'll send you a certificate, but it doesn't count. It's not the IAU. The crater named after, or the asteroid named after your loved one, nobody else will ever hear about it. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Jessica, for helping get this thing going technically. And see you next time. Check in again next Friday night at 8 p.m. We'll see what's on the screen. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy, and keep looking up. Bye-bye.